The Krethax were apex predators. Their homeworld of Kret 9 had 3 moons and twice the gravity of Earth. Breeding warriors who could tear through reinforced steel with their bare claws. They stood 8 feet tall, their muscular frames covered in obsidian scales that could deflect plasma fire. Their eyes glowed amber in darkness, evolved to hunt prey across volcanic plains where shadows meant death. They were the galaxy's most feared soldiers, the enforcers of the Galactic Coalition, the species that made even the warlike Draxians think twice. And right now, 4 of their cubs were huddled around Leora Kane's bunk, checking under her bed with scanning devices. "Clear on thermal," whispered Varric, his voice trembling slightly as his clawed hand gripped the scanner. He was the largest of the cubs, barely 6 years old in human terms but already 5 feet tall with developing armor plates across his shoulders. He'd once boasted about killing a razor wolf during his clan's survival trial. Now, he jumped at shadows. Leora sat cross-legged on her bed, datapad in hand, trying very hard not to laugh. "Guys, I promise there's nothing under there." "You don't know that," hissed Sherix, the only female cub in the group. Her tail lashed nervously as she aimed her flashlight into every corner. "The entity could have followed us from Earth Cinema archives. Digital contamination is possible." "And her why? Enter the cading round. It was just a movie," Leora said gently, though her amusement was evident. "Fiction. Made up. Not real." "The data logs confirmed it was based on human experiences," countered Zareth. His ear fins flattened against his skull in fear. "Cultural documentation. Warning archives," Leora sighed. This was getting out of hand. It had started 3 weeks ago, when the Krethax delegation visited the human diplomatic vessel Testament. The adult Krethax warriors were there for standard tactical exchange protocols, sharing combat strategies and weapon specifications. Their cubs, traveling with the delegation for educational purposes, had been placed in Leora's care as the ship's xenocultural liaison. The cubs had been insufferable at first. Arrogant. Boastful. They'd mocked human frailty, laughed at Earth's gentle 1G gravity, sneered at humanity's lack of natural weapons. Varric had particularly enjoyed demonstrating how his claws could puncture a steel panel while asking what humans could possibly do with their soft, useless hands. Leora had tolerated it with professional patience. Then movie night happened. She'd meant to show them a human documentary, something about engineering or exploration. But she'd been tired, distracted by reports, and had accidentally queued up her personal collection instead. By the time she noticed, the cubs were already entranced by the opening credits. The film was The Haunting Beneath, a psychological horror piece about something that lived in the dark spaces of a space station, something that folded itself into impossible angles and whispered with the voices of the dead. It was considered a masterpiece of human horror cinema. Subtle, atmospheric, terrifying. For humans, for the Krethax cubs, who had evolved to be apex predators, who feared nothing that could be fought or killed. It was existential nightmare fuel. The entity in the film couldn't be fought. It couldn't be killed. It didn't follow the rules of physics or biology. It simply was. Lurking in shadows, hiding in spaces that shouldn't exist. Waiting for the moment when you were most vulnerable and alone. Varric had made it 40 minutes before his scales began rattling. A Krethax fear response. Sharix had tried to maintain composure until the scene where the entity mimicked a crew member's voice from inside a ventilation shaft. Zareth had actually whimpered something Leora didn't know Krethax could do when the protagonist checked under their bed and found those impossible, many-jointed fingers curled around the frame. The 4th cub, little Naxik, had grabbed Leora's arm with claws that left shallow scratches and refused to let go until the credits rolled. "Why do humans create such things?" Sharix had asked, her voice small and broken. "What purpose does this serve?" Leora had tried to explain. Entertainment, catharsis, the safe exploration of fear. But the cubs had looked at her like she'd revealed that humans routinely juggled live grenades for fun. That night, she'd found all 4 cubs sleeping in a defensive formation outside her quarters. Now, 3 weeks later, they still checked her room every night before she slept. They'd expanded their nightly ritual to include full security sweeps, blessed salt circles, learned from human supernatural databases, and what they called shadow containment protocols. "The ventilation shaft is secure," reported Naxic, his voice serious as he sealed the vent cover with military-grade adhesive. "Nothing can mimic voices from there now." "I appreciate your concern," Leora said carefully. "But you know your parents are going to wonder why you're not sleeping in your assigned quarters. Safer in groups," Varric muttered, settling into a guard position by her door. "Humans understand this. That's why you invented the buddy system." The other cubs took their positions around her room, creating a defensive perimeter that would have made their warrior parents proud. If not deeply confused, Leora looked at these apex predators, these future warriors who would someday enforce galactic law and make entire species surrender through reputation alone. Now reduced to checking closets and installing extra lighting, and she realized something profound about humanity's place in the galaxy. Humans weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. They didn't have natural armor or weapons or the ability to breathe in toxic atmospheres. But humans had imaginations that could terrify beings who'd never known terror. Humans could create horrors that transcended physical reality, fears that bypassed every evolutionary defense. The Krethax were bred to fight monsters they could see and kill. Humans were raised on monsters that couldn't be killed, that lived in the spaces between logic and reality, that turned safety itself into a weapon. "Leora," Varric said quietly, his amber eyes meeting hers with unusual vulnerability. "Do humans really live with this, knowing that such things might exist in the dark?" She thought about her own childhood, about checking closets and keeping nightlights burning, about every human who'd ever pulled blankets over their head or left a door cracked open, letting hallway light spill in. "Yeah," she said softly. "We do." "You're braver than I thought," Sharix admitted, her tail curling in what Leora had learned was a gesture of respect. "All of you are." Leora smiled and closed her datapad. Outside her viewport, stars streamed past as the Testament traveled between systems. Somewhere on those ships were Krethax warriors who could tear through battle armor, who'd never retreated from any fight. And in her quarters were their children, apex predators checking under her bed, standing guard through the night against horrors that humanity had imagined into existence. "All clear," Varric finally announced, though his claws remained extended. "You may sleep now." "Leora Kane." "We will maintain watch." "Thank you," she said, meaning it. As she lay down, surrounded by her protective detail of traumatized predator cubs, Leora made a mental note. Next movie night would definitely be a documentary. Probably about engineering. Or maybe a nature film. Definitely nothing from the horror collection. Though she had to admit, as Naxic double-checked the vent one more time, there was something deeply satisfying about being the species that scared the monsters.